loving kindness and compassion. Certainly themes and ideas and practices that both Jesus and the Buddha taught, and I think not only taught, but exemplified, modeled. And I think that actually is perhaps way more important than the words. The words might help us to learn, but I think we're moved when we see people who embody the qualities that we admire and that we respect. What is the saying? I'd rather see a sermon any day than hear one. A lot of truth to that, and a dangerous thing for a minister to say, right? But it's true. I think it's very true that we are moved when we see people living with high ideals and practicing them, whether anybody's looking or not, So loving kindness and compassion. Just say those words with me. Loving kindness and compassion. Loving kindness and compassion. The two terms are related, but they're distinct. And particularly so, I think, in the practice of Buddhism. They tend to be very careful, very mindful, the way those two terms are used. And I want to bring to light some of the subtle differences of those two terms, both equally important and certainly related, but they're not synonyms. So we're going to look first at compassion. What is compassion? In Buddhism, the word karuna is used to mean compassion. It means compassion. And at its heart, compassion is about alleviating the suffering of another and alleviating the suffering of one. It's the desire to alleviate suffering. In the song that Eliyahu just sang, there was the line, and I forget exactly how it was worded in the song, but it was the idea of look around you. There's somebody near you that needs something that you can respond to, that you can help. I think compassion requires not just a willing heart, but open eyes. The practice, not just the willingness, but the practice of looking around us, noticing who might be hurting, noticing who might be struggling, noticing where we might be able to interject something of help or something of support or something of kindness. Compassion is a heartfelt wish for the alleviation of suffering of others and of oneself. Compassion arises in response to suffering. It arises because we have trained ourselves to be aware of and sensitive to what the other may be going through or experiencing. And compassion then arises in response to that. There's that in us that sees the suffering of the other and is moved by that and wants to do what they can to help alleviate it, to dial it down, to eliminate it. It includes a deep feeling, a deep sense of empathy. We recognize, we are paying attention, we notice, which means maybe that we don't have our face in our phones as much as we are prone to do today. Maybe it means instead of looking down, we are looking up and we are looking at each other, noticing each other, acknowledging each other. Compassion is what motivates us to take action, to do something. It motivates us not only to see the suffering of another, but to be really keen at what do I have in this moment that might somehow be of service to the other. It is paying attention, right? Paying attention to the sound and the voice of the person that's speaking to you, noticing if there seems to be some hurt there or some sadness there or some grief there, and believing enough in ourselves as an instrument of peace and compassion to be able to make a difference. I think that part of compassionate action also involves a certain healthy sense of self-worth. Think about that for a moment. When we notice the suffering of another, when we notice that someone is hurting, when someone is having a problem, a challenge, compassion motivates us to do something about that. But in order, I think, to actually take action, we've got to believe that we're worthy enough and that we have something to give. Does that make sense? And the truth of the matter is, every one of us is worthy. Every one of us has something that we can give. And it's amazing, I think, how simple that something can be at times. It's not about having to do it all, but it's about being an instrument of goodwill where we are in the moment as the moment and the need arises. How many of you have ever been struggling and having just a really difficult day or a really difficult time in your life, and someone says something uplifting or positive to you? Or maybe they just reach out and send you a text even, or an email, or a phone call. Remember those? A phone call that says, hey, you know what? You just crossed my mind. I'm thinking about you. Have you ever been on the receiving end of that? And would you not say that that gesture that I've just described, a little text or a phone call or an email, hey, I'm thinking about you, is not a great big thing, right? It's something every one of us is capable of doing. But if it comes at a time that you are hurting, that you are suffering, doesn't it make a difference? I have this little deal with God that I made many, many years ago. I have a couple of deals I made with God. One was, if I ever get sick, it has to be on a Monday. Because then I have from Monday until Saturday to recover. And do you know what? In 44 years of ministry, I've only missed 4 Sundays. Only 4 Sundays. And one of them was having a baby. Anyway. So that's one of my deals. But another deal that I have with God is when one of you, or a family member, but you are my family, when one of you crosses my mind, I reach out to you. I send you an email. I might try to call you, but a lot of times now calls seem to go to voicemail because we get so many spam calls and you don't necessarily know it's me trying to call you. But I have this little deal because I figure that if you cross my mind, that there maybe is something going on in your life and that it's maybe an invitation from God, from Spirit, through me to reach out to you and just let you know somebody's thinking about you. I may not have the answer. You may not even pick up the phone. But it's a noticing, it's a paying attention, it's a showing, it's a certain way of being that's motivated by compassion, that's motivated in that example by the thought that maybe this person is carrying something heavy right now. And just maybe I might be able to say something to lighten that a little bit. In Buddhism, my understanding is that compassion is looked at as something deeper and more than empathy. Empathy is the ability to feel what another is feeling. And I think that's an important thing, to be able to feel what another is feeling. But compassion takes that further. Compassion sees the suffering, is paying attention, is motivated then to do what one can to alleviate that, not just to feel what the other person is feeling and then dismiss it. Hope that makes sense. So that's a deeper, closer look, I think, to compassion as a spiritual practice, as a heart awakening practice. Loving kindness. I remember there was a time that I never even knew that term. I knew the word kindness, and I knew the word love. But I remember that there was a point in my journey where I heard that term for the very first time, and I was so taken by it. Loving kindness. To me, it's so much more than just love and so much more than just kindness. To me, it kind of takes the word love out of the way that I know I've gotten sloppy using it at times, and I'm sure some of you maybe have as well. And when I say sloppy, I mean I say things like, I love dark chocolate, which I do. And then I might say to my husband, I love you, which I do. They're not equivalent. They're not equivalent, right? That's what I mean by getting a little sloppy, with the word. And yet loving kindness brings me to a spiritual practice. It brings me to something that is unconditional. It brings me to something that invites me to open my heart and to keep my heart as open as I can. It doesn't mean I do it perfectly, but I can say, and I bet you can say this is true for yourself as well, the intention and the desire to do it well is there. Can I say the intention and the desire to do it is there. Loving kindness is a sincere wish for the happiness, well-being, and flourishing of oneself and the other. Of oneself and the other. It involves cultivating the feelings of goodwill, of affection, of loving kindness, of warmth for the other and for oneself. The cultivation of the feeling. That's an important piece of it. We can feel loving kindness. We can feel goodwill. We can feel friendliness and warmth toward another. Cultivating it is going deeper with it. It is saying, not only do I recognize that there are times that I actually feel that, but I'm actually going to practice deepening into that. I'm going to practice increasing my capacity for those qualities. Loving kindness meditation, I believe, is one of the best ways to do that. It's also called metta meditation. Loving kindness, the practice of loving kindness arises independently of circumstances. Compassion is in response to recognizing the suffering of another and the motivation to do something about it. Loving kindness arises independently of circumstances. Loving kindness is a practice that we deepen into where we are cultivating feelings of goodwill, feelings of friendliness, feelings of genuine care for and about the other. The end of the lesson, when I give a little bit of homework, I'll actually take you through the very simple to practice, very simple to understand steps of loving kindness. And so loving kindness creates the environment, I think, in which we become more sensitive to the other, more sensitive to our own pain and suffering, and more willing to do something about it. Does that make sense? More willing to respond, more willing to do something about it. Both Jesus and the Buddha emphasized these qualities. In Christianity, I think we can recognize that Jesus was known as the embodiment of compassion and love, which is why it just confuses the heck out of me, the way he's been hijacked to create, I don't even know how to say it, to create so much animosity and so much unrest when he was really, I believe, was really about compassion and love, unconditional love. When he was asked, what is the greatest commandment? You may or may not realize that he was being tested by that question. He was being tested in terms of how well did he know the Jewish tradition and the Mosaic law. And he responded, he said that the greatest commandment is that you love God with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. That's right out of the Old Testament. And then he built upon it, and to love your neighbor as yourself. To love your neighbor as yourself. When he sent the disciples out, I've got a frog in my throat this morning. When he sent the disciples out, he sent them out by two. He was really wise. I don't think he wanted them to try to go it alone. We're told. He sent them out by twos. And he told them, when you go into a town and you are going to share my teachings and my ideas, if you're not met with openness, you are to leave and shake the dust, the sand off your shoes. He didn't say dig your heels in and start an argument. He just said, present my teachings, and if they're received, great. If they're not, then just leave, then just let it go. And then he talked about, and they will know you are my followers. They will know that you are my disciples by how well you love each other, not by how often you agree with each other. We're living in a time where we've made agreeing with each other more important than loving each other. Think about that for a moment. We are so far apart, many of us, politically, right? I mean, the reason there's so much unrest, I think one of the reasons, is we disagree about so much. And I'm not trying to line up on either side of the agreement right now. It's certainly not from this platform. But Jesus didn't say, they'll know you are my followers by how well you agree with each other. He said, by how well you love each other. By how well you love each other. Think about who it's reported that he hung out with. He probably wouldn't have hung out with you and me. We're too ordinary. At least I am. Most of us are too white. Most of us are very straight. Most of us are what I would call plain vanilla. I don't think he would have hung out with us. When we read what was reported about who he did hang out with, it was who nobody else wanted anything to do with for all sorts of different reasons. As I talked about last week, he said, when you do it to the least of these, what? You do it to me. When you feed, when you clothe, when you nurture, when you support the least of these, the marginalized, you are doing it for me. He was an example of what's called agape love, universal love, unconditional love, not dark chocolate love. Loving kindness love, loving kindness love. There's a story in one of the Buddhist texts of a woman who came to the Buddha. She had lost her only child, and she was deeply grieving. And she asked the Buddha to return her child to life. And the Buddha said, I want you to go to all of the households that you can find and bring back to me a mustard seed from a household that has never experienced death, that has never experienced grief. And the story goes that she went far and wide, and you know how it ends. She could not return to the Buddha with a mustard seed from a house that had never experienced death or grief. And the story suggests that in that attempt to try to find a place where grief and death had not hit, that she was awakened to the truth that there is suffering in life, that there is suffering in life, and that just making peace with that, understanding that, is in itself a tremendous step forward in growth and in spiritual awakening. And so we have both of these teachers in their own ways and in very different times and very different cultures, really, teaching and modeling the ideas of compassion and of loving kindness. And when we think about our families, when we think about our communities, when we think about our country and our world, if we were more skillful and more willing to practice compassion and loving kindness, we really would be getting awfully close to fulfilling that second part of the mission of really healing our world. I don't know if you believe this or not, but I still do. I still believe there's hope for us. I still believe that humanity can learn to live together harmoniously, that we can be very different and still care about each other and show up with caring. And when I see people like us come together, it suggests to me that that hope is very much alive, that we each have a role to play, And that's not dependent upon how smart we are, or what color we are, or what gender we are, or what sexual preference we have, or our educational background, or it's not dependent on any of that. It's dependent on the awakening of the heart. The awakening of the heart. Say that with me. The awakening of the heart. The awakening of the heart. We talk about enlightenment. We think about enlightenment. We think about an open mind and a clear mind, and I think those are important. I don't know that we talk enough about awakening the heart. And so maybe we could take on as our own personal practice, just holding the thought each day, where and how can I keep my heart awake? Where and how can I keep my heart awake? And then simply respond to whatever arises. It's not like we have to go looking for it. Have you noticed that? We don't have to go looking for it. It's right there if we have trained ourselves to keep our eyes open to it, to pay attention to it. I told you I would share with you, and many of you probably already know this practice, but it's a practice that I think is deeply powerful and deeply effective. It's the practice of loving kindness meditation, metta meditation. And it is to hold a thought and a feeling, such as the one that we use every Sunday as we close our service out. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free of pain and suffering. May all beings know the comfort and ease of well-being. May all beings be at peace. But the practice of it is that it radiates out in 5 circles, starting with oneself. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be free of pain and suffering. May I know the comfort and ease of well-being. May my heart be at peace. Because this idea of the alleviation of suffering is not just about the other. Jesus didn't say, love your neighbor instead of yourself. He's reported to have said, love your neighbor as yourself. So starting metta meditation has us starting with holding loving kindness feelings for ourselves. Then the next layer out is you think about somebody it's easy for you to love. It could be your child, it could be a parent, it could be your partner, it could be your pet. But someone or something that's easy for you to love. And then you practice feeling that, not just rattling through the words, not like just saying the Hail Mary or the Our Father or the Nicene Creed or the Father's Prayer. It's practicing the feeling of it toward somebody that you love. Then the next circle out, the third, is to practice it toward someone neutral. That might be somebody that you don't really know very well. Maybe you see them every time you go get your coffee at Starbucks or something. You try to bring them to your awareness, and you hold that same the same practice of a feeling of what we're trying to do is cultivate the feeling of kindness, the feeling of caring, the feeling of genuine concern for the other. And then the fourth is to hold that for someone that you're in conflict with. Now, do not start, this is my opinion, do not start with Hitler. I could name other names, but I won't. That one's a safer one to name right now. Do not start with somebody that's at the outer edges of where you can't even imagine your compassion going just yet. Are you with me? Because that's what our mind does. Our mind wants to say, oh, you want me to forgive so-and-so for that? No way. How about we start a little closer to home? So we think about somebody, nod your head if any of you have somebody right now in your life that's a little difficult for you. It's a little hard for you to interact with that person. They get under your skin. I'll tell you, I have more than one, and I'll share if you don't have one, but I bet we all have someone. Am I right? Okay. That's the person we start with, not the one that's the most difficult for you now, because remember, we're doing this not for the other, really. We're doing it, well, we are doing it for the other, but we're doing it first to build a deeper capacity in ourselves. So it's for that person that is a little difficult for us to feel warm toward. And then the fifth cycle or circle is the idea of all sentient beings. So all of us, as much and as big as you can think of the all of us. So it's doubtful that anything that I've said to you today is totally new to you. I realize, especially in our community, how much you read, how much you study, how classes you've taken and so forth, that you know a lot of this, as do I. But I think when we come together and we say we carve out this time to be together or to watch online, to be reminded of things that we know, so that in the reminding, we are more motivated to go a little bit further, a little more consistent, a little more steady in our practice. So that's always my hope, that there's something that you hear that you go, oh yeah, I forgot that, or oh yeah, I've gotten a little bit slow or sloppy with that practice. I'm going to bring that back. I know that I can grow. I know I can do better. God bless you.